on the record at 11:17 a.m.
This is the deposition of Dr. Wayne Carver, recorded on May 21st, 2019 in Old Saybrook, Connecticut. This deposition is being taken in the case of Leonard Posner versus James Fetzer et al. And was noticed by attorney Marissa Berlinger for the plaintiff. The videotape operator is Chad Roy of Geomatrix Productions, 270 Amity Road, Woodbridge, Connecticut. And I don't believe there are any stipulations, but I will say up front that Mr. Fetzer, I don't consent to you recording this conversation. If you are, Connecticut prohibits recording a telephone call unless both parties consent under Connecticut General Statute 52-570, subsection D. A video recording is being made of the deposition, and all parties will be able to order a transcript and/or video from the court reporter and videographer after we're finished today. I am Marissa Berlinger, and I represent plaintiff Leonard Posner. Mr. Fetzer, you can go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yes, well, I am James Fetzer. I am a defendant in this case. I'm a former Marine Corps officer, retired university professor, and the editor of Nobody Died in Handicap.
Okay, doctor, would you raise your right hand, please? Do you swear that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Good morning, Dr. Carver.
Good morning.
Could you spell your name for the court reporter, please?
My name is Harold, Harold, Wayne, Wayne, Carver, Carver, and stylized the second, as it is also my grandfather's name.
Have you been deposed before?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Well, I'll still go over some ground rules for you. You're under oath, as you were just sworn in, as if you're sitting before a judge. Please give audible answers for the sake of the court reporter, no nuh-uh, uh-huh, or nodding your head, and also for Mr. Fetzer's sake. Also, for the sake of the record, I will try not to talk over you or interrupt you, and if you could do the same for me, that would be great. Let me know whenever you need to take a break, or if I need to take a break, I will also let you know. Mr. Fetzer, if you need to take a break as well, please feel free to let me know. I'll just ask that any pending questions be answered before we move to break. And if you have any concerns, one moment. If you have any concerns about understanding a question, just ask me to rephrase and clarify, and I'll try and do so. Is there anything that would prevent you from giving full and honest testimony today, such as any medications or illness?
No, ma'am.
Okay. So please describe your education for me.
I have a Bachelor of Science degree in human biology and a doctorate of medicine, both from Brown University in a program that I finished in 1977. I then served 1 year residency training in general surgery at the University of Chicago. I then served 2 years residency training in anatomic pathology at the Presbyterian St. Luke's Medical Center in Chicago, and then 2 years fellowship training in forensic pathology at the Office of the Medical Examiner, officially known as County of Cook, which is Chicago and a large hunk of the surrounding suburbs. That finished in the late spring of 1982, at which time I took the American Board of Pathology certification examinations in both anatomic and forensic pathology and passed them both. Shortly thereafter, I began work at the Office of Chief Medical Examiner here in Connecticut and remained there until my retirement.
Do you hold any licenses? I'm sorry if I missed that.
Yes, I formerly had a license to practice medicine and surgery in Illinois. When my professional responsibilities ran their course and I no longer was appearing in Illinois, I let that lapse. And I currently have a license to practice medicine and surgery in the state of Connecticut, and it's still valid.
And are you currently employed?
No, I am not. I am retired.
retired from where?
The Office of the Chief Medical Examiner here in Connecticut.
Okay. What were your responsibilities for the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner?
For the majority of my time there, I was the Chief Medical Examiner. For 26 of the 30 years that I was fully employed. My responsibilities were twofold. One, I was the administrative head of the agency, and I was also one of the, depending on time, 6 to 4 doctors who supervised the individual investigations of sudden, unexpected, and violent death, and performed the autopsies if they were included in that investigation.
And do your responsibilities include working with death certificates?
Yes, ma'am.
And specifically Connecticut death certificates?
Yes, although I signed several hundred of them in Illinois as well.
Okay. Okay, so let's move on to the specifics or the generals of this case. What do you know about the case you're being deposed for today, Pozner versus Fetzer et al.?
I know that Noah Posner was one of the deceased children at the Sandy Hook.
I'm sorry, Mr. Fetzer, is that coming from your end? Please continue.
The mass shooting at the grade school.
Jim.
Mr. Fetzer?
Hello? Yes, Marissa, I'm sorry.
Is there someone else on the line?
We're okay.
Is-
I was called, yeah. I should have put it on no call, do not disturb. I'll do that now.
Please do, thank you. I'm sorry, you were saying what you knew about the
Yes.
case today?
The plaintiff's son was one of the decedents at the Sandy Hook massacre. And in general terms, the Posner family is very displeased with certain people's subsequent actions and things they've said and published, and the suit involves that displeasure.
What do you know about the plaintiff, Leonard Posner?
I know him to be the father of the decedent. I also know him to be an observant Jew. I know this because strictly observant Jewish families have an aversion to a post-mortem altering of the body, including autopsies. And I have encountered this numerous times in my career. Actually made a bit of a dedicated study of trying to learn what various people needed in terms of their religious and spiritual needs involving violent death. And so, in accordance with their wishes, we behaved ourselves accordingly.
Have you ever communicated with Leonard Posner since December 2012?
I may have, relatively close to that time. I have no direct recollection of having talked to him personally in a long time.
Do you know the defendant, James Fetzer?
No, I do not.
Do you know the defendant, Mike Palachek?
No, I do not.
Do you know anything about the defendant, Wrongs Without Remedies, LLC?
Only that something they published got them involved in this, but I know that's it.
Okay. And are you familiar with a child named Noah Posner?
Yes, I am.
How?
He was my patient. That is, I was in charge of the individual examination of his body, which included examining the body, collecting appropriate specimens, directing appropriate records, both photographic and written, be created, and issuing his death certificate.
Okay. Why don't you walk me through that and tell me how you came to be involved?
I was not only the chief on that day, but it was also my weekend on call, which means you would be the first physician in the office who was contacted to make decisions about how to handle a case that was reportable to the office. By way of aside, many more cases are reportable than are actually accepted. The greatest example is if you die at home outside of a hospital, you're reportable. Most of those people are natural deaths. We don't accept them. But I was informed at the beginning of the business day that the shootings at Sandy Hook had occurred. And it was obvious from the very early information that we would be heavily involved in this situation.
And so what role specifically did you play? What were the steps that you took?
Okay, well, first, being both the chief and the doctor on call, I was in charge of organizing our response. And so the first thing I did was enlist the services of one of our investigators and went to the scene. One of the first things you do in a complicated situation involving many people is assess the situation so you can have some idea of how many people you're going to need, how many doctors, how many technicians, how many vehicles, how many people on overtime, what consultants, if any, you have to get in call and establish your communications with the appropriate police departments and state's attorney's office. So that was the first thing. It was very clear that we had, at that scene, 24 casualties that had to be brought into the office eventually. There were 2 children who were taken to the hospital and pronounced dead before the EMTs finished their evaluation and determined that no one was treatable. Everybody was dead. The rest was a lot of telephone organization with my own people and with the police. As a result, we brought several investigators and me as the doctor to the scene that evening, also a photographer and several autopsy technicians. With the assistance of the health department and I believe the Army, they put up a temporary building right next to the school so we could transport the bodies with only minimal public exposure, work on them. And we spent the majority of the evening coordinating with the identification records of the police, assigning case numbers to each individual. Case numbers in our office consists of 2 digits for the year and then a consecutive number. And so on January 1st, right after midnight, the first case that's reported is, in this year, would have been 19-1, and the next one is 19-2, and so forth. We then took pictures of the faces designed to be able to identify the children, or all the individuals, with that case number prominently in the picture. And then those records were walked over to the police van where the pictures were printed, and the police took them to family members for official identification. The idea being to spare the family trip, oh, God forbid, to the scene, but also to our office, which was about an hour away from where this occurred.
And did you identify Noah Posner in that manner?
Yes, that was done, and that included physical descriptions of the child and descriptions of his clothing, as provided to the police investigators and then relayed to us.
And then after the identification process, what was the next part of your process?
Our personnel and our vehicles were used to transport everybody to the office of the chief medical examiner. The last of them left the scene at about 10:30 p.m. It was very obvious that all the deaths were associated with gunshot wounds. X-ray examination of the body is a very important, an essential actually part of the post-mortem examination of a gunshot wound. It's pretty important in live people too. And we, at the time, had a working relationship with the Quinnipiac University's Department of Radiology Technicians Education. And so their number 2 professor in the department and a bunch of their students came and x-rayed bodies at our facility all night long. The doctors, autopsy technicians, photographers, we had 4 doctors, 10 technicians, 2 photographers, and a number of extra clerical people to do the paperwork. And I don't know how many people we put on overtime for that, but and we started doing the post-mortem examinations, which were all autopsies, except in Noah's case. At 8 o'clock that morning, by 1:30 in the afternoon, the death certificates were signed and on all the children, and the funeral homes notified that they could come and pick them up. They had a tremendous similar mobilization of resources with the funeral homes. The last of the adults from the school were autopsied that afternoon. I was strongly encouraged to attend a press conference. Couldn't get out of it. And then the next morning, because I'm still the doctor on call, I did the autopsies of the assailant and his mother.
And so as part of this general process, you performed a post-mortem examination of Noah Posner?
Yes, I did.
And when Noah Posner's body was transferred to his respective funeral home, that's when it left your possession?
Yes.
Are we marking Carver 1 or
Let's go with 7 and continue.
7? Sure.
So you've been handed a document marked Exhibit 7, which in the top left corner says Report of Investigation. Do you recognize this document?
Yes, I do.
Can you walk me through each of the pages in this document?
Okay. The first page is, as labeled, a report of investigation. These documents are prepared usually by one of our investigators, sometimes by one of the doctors. It contains demographic information about the deceased. It is an official record of which case number is assigned to the decedent, a history, a brief history of events leading to the death, a brief examination of the body, the signature of the investigator who prepared the report.
And did you oversee the creation of
Yes,
this first page?
Yes. And,
So let's go on to page 2, which
Page-
is marked at the bottom, Post-Mortem Report, page 1 of 3.
yes, this is the report of my examination of Noah Posner's body. It consists of 3 pages, 2, 3, and 4 of Exhibit 7. And the last page is a report from the Toxicology Department. The toxicology is the study of body fluids and tissues for drugs or poisonous chemicals. It is a division of the office and under the supervision of the chief medical examiner and then a director of the toxicology department. It not only performs those examinations, but also is responsible for storage of specimens other than tissue for examination under the microscope that are retained by the office. This report indicates that I submitted and they accepted samples of blood and samples of vitreous humor. Vitreous humor is the fluid in the globe of the eye. It is especially useful because it does not contain a significant number of cells, and the breakdown of cells interferes, after death, interferes with certain types of examinations, similar to the ones you might receive in connection with a doctor's visit, and also is very difficult to contaminate, and so serves as a check on the qualitative nature of other examinations, and quantitative. So we get it on everybody. It's very useful. And this indicates that the then acting director, Carrie Slattery, received those specimens and they were then put into the storage system, that I did not request any analysis at that time. And then there's my initials indicating that I reviewed this report.
Okay, so the toxicology report, which is page 5, which actually at the bottom states page 1 of 1.
Okay.
Is that Carrie Slattery's signature
Yes.
you mentioned? But you oversaw the creation of the toxicology report?
Well, I oversee Carrie, yes.
Okay. And then going back to page 4, which is marked at the bottom, post-mortem report, page 3 of 3, is that your signature?
Yes.
And then can you,
Well, the signature above my name
sure,
is
yes,
my signature. There's 2 signatures on this document. So.
okay. And then the cause of death of Noah Posner was multiple gunshot wounds, is that right?
That's correct. And the cause of death in this report is automatically the same as that on the death certificate. So when I create the death certificate in the computer, it automatically drops into the written report later, but eventually.
Okay. And the report of investigation and the external examination, evidence of injury, cause of death, and toxicology report were all created around the time that you performed Noah Posner's post-mortem examination?
Yes, these documents are dictated in the presence of the body, subsequently transcribed and proofread. And when all that process is finished, I sign the final product, and the date under my signature on the 4th page of Exhibit 7 is January 29th, and that reflects the date that all the paperwork was done and I signed it.
When it's done and you sign all of these documents, are they then filed with the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner?
Yes, and the law governing the Office of Chief Medical Examiner states that if we believe further investigation is warranted, that we should forward the documents to the responsible state's attorney. In Connecticut, I think there's 13 state's attorneys, I'm not quite sure. We will use discretion on that in some cases, but if the manner of death is classified as an homicide, it is automatically forwarded to the state's attorney. And then by the time the paperwork's done, we also routinely have a written request from the investigating police department, and that is refilled.
Okay, so can you walk me through the process that you used to conduct Noah Posner's post-mortem examination in a little bit more detail?
Okay. Well, I examined the outside of the body with its clothes on, and examined the x-rays, which because of the nature of x-rays, they're taken inside a relatively thin plastic body bag, so the x-ray process doesn't involve any potential messing with physical evidence. Part of the post-mortem examination is to direct that photographs be taken. Some are routine, others are very specific at my direction for various injuries. Actually, in some cases, lack of injury as well. Okay. So we examine the body, do the x-rays and examination of the body and clothing. There was a bullet that was stuck in the clothing. Obviously, it had gone through the body and lost enough of its energy that it was stopped by the clothing. I retrieved that. I used a scribing instrument to put the number 852 on it. It simply reflects the fact that it was the 852nd bullet I had recovered from a body in Connecticut. Chicago police wouldn't let us scribe them. I also dictated that in keeping with the wishes of the family for spiritual reasons, that I did not cut into the body, and that I packaged all clothing and contaminated any disposable equipment that was contaminated with blood, and packaged it separately to be transported to the funeral home, in keeping with observant Jewish tradition that all such material should be buried with the body, or not being my understanding of observant Jewish tradition. I then specifically examined and dictated documentation of the wounds. I then used a needle and syringe to pull fluid from both chest cavities. This allowed me to get a sample of blood, and also confirm the x-ray diagnosis that the cavities were full of fluid, and specifically blood.
And was that the cardiac blood mentioned in the toxicology
Yes,
report
yes.
in Exhibit 7?
Yes. And then he used another needle to obtain the vitreous humor. And just as an aside, taking the fluid out of the globe of the eye does not interfere with standard funerary practices.
And you mentioned earlier that you did not conduct an autopsy of Noah Posner. Is that correct?
Well, no, I did not conduct the internal examination, which is usually or colloquially synonymous with the term autopsy. Internal examination is opening the body with incisions, something like a surgeon would use, but considerably larger, examining the organs in place, taking them out, examining each one in turn in a fashion designed to examine that organ. Examining a heart is different than examining a lung. And recording your findings and retaining tissue for possible examination under the microscope. I did not perform that portion of a typical examination of Noah Posner's body because the family requested that I didn't, because between the x-rays, the external examination, and the use of a needle and syringe, I felt I had more than enough information to fulfill my statutory responsibilities in terms of documentation and certification. Yeah.
Okay, so just to clarify, you performed an autopsy in that you performed x-rays and the...
We would call it a post-mortem examination is what we did.
Okay.
An autopsy, an internal examination, is a subset of a post-mortem examination. Okay? So we perform a lot of examinations of dead bodies where we feel we can execute our responsibilities without opening them. We do a lot where we have to open them to do them properly.
Okay. So you did not perform an internal
I
examination?
did not perform an internal examination.
And did the decision not to perform an internal examination affect your findings?
No.
Why not?
Well, first of all, I have a considerable, it's obvious with the 852 or whatever, considerable experience with firearms injuries. This was obvious that and this and the x-rays are obvious that a very high energy projectile had crossed the center of his chest from one side to the other. Both chest cavities were filled with blood. And this particular kind of projectile, it's got so much energy that it just breaks up. It's not, it just does, and it leaves small fragments of metal on the x-ray over a wide area. And so that would give me a marker of how much, what organs were destroyed and how completely. So I had that information, and so I could say that's what he died of. And other questions, including it also gave me information that I felt I could use to answer the types of questions that frequently come up in these situations.
Were you certain that Noah Posner's gunshot wounds were the cause of death?
Yes.
And were you certain that Noah Posner's gunshot wounds were not survivable?
Yes. And that, by the way, all of the cases were reviewed specifically for that question by me and a colleague who was a specialist in trauma care, including supervision of pre-hospital care, and he's a surgeon, so he takes care of people who are injured. We performed that review twice, and we came to the conclusion that none of the 28 individuals had survivable or even treatable injuries, including Noah.
Okay, I'm gonna back up a little bit and go back to the identification of the bodies.
Yes.
So you said you used photos to identify the bodies instead of conducting in-person IDs. Is that right?
Well, yes, but having reviewed the entire file of this child prior to coming here today, our file contains a record that his mother viewed the body at the funeral home and signed a document indicating that it was Noah Posner. So the photographs were used to get the process going and get it completed, but Mrs. Posner elected to do this in person. And so that supersedes anything we did with pictures. And as an aside, it's actually quite common in my experience that even when we make arrangements for family members to be excused from the onerous duty of examining a body and forming identification papers, there are many families who believe that this is a function they must perform and want to do. And you don't interfere with people like that.
So did your original practice of using a photo to identify Noah Posner's body produce accurate results?
Yes.
And those results were later confirmed by his mother,
Yes.
Veronique Posner?
Yes.
And is the practice of using photos to identify bodies acceptable in the medical field?
Yes.
Okay, so we're going to switch gears a little bit. And in your role as chief medical examiner, do you have experience filling out death certificates?
Yes, I do.
What sort of experience?
Well, over the course of my career, I performed about 6,000 autopsies, probably inspected another 4,000 to 5,000 bodies for the purpose of issuing a death certificate, so I issued death certificates on all them. The office, when I first became chief medical examiner, the office contracted a number of autopsies to private pathologists in hospitals. And prior to my assuming the office of the position of chief, there was no formal mechanism to review those records for completeness. So when I first became chief, I undertook to review all of the contract autopsies that had been performed during my tenure as a non-chief, which was about 5,000 autopsies, and I issued about 3,000 death certificates. It is also my responsibility to, or was my responsibility to supervise the death certificates of all the issued by the office. Including the fact that many death certificates at the end of an examination do not conclude the cause of death, and a death certificate is issued saying pending further study. This is usually done when drug overdoses are suspected or may be involved, and you gotta wait for the toxicology to get done, which takes time. But you can't bury a body without a death certificate, so we issue one without a completed cause of death. The responsible physician would then later get the information, issue a amended certificate or a document amending the certificate. And the chief medical examiner, and during my tenure as deputy chief, the deputy chief medical examiner was responsible for reviewing that and signing the back of the amended certificate, which is basically a letter to the Registrar of Vital Statistics that says, take the information on the other side of this and put it on the death certificate. So I had all those. And I've also been called upon to teach residents in other fields how to fill out death certificates. I may not have been as successful in that as I was in other things.
So suffice it to say, you have a lot of experience
Yes.
completing and reviewing
Yes,
death
yes,
certificates.
yes. And in fact, the residency in forensic or fellowship in forensic pathology is the only place in medical training where the recent medical graduates receive formal training in how to do death certificates.
And just to clarify, Noah Posner's death certificate was not one that needed an amendment or some sort of pending cause of death?
No.
Okay. So I'm handing you what has previously been marked Exhibit 4.
Oh, okay. So it's not going to be 8.
Which states VS-4ME in the top left corner and has a handwritten blank copy on the top.
Yes.
Is this the death certificate that you would normally fill out in the ordinary course of business?
Yes, it is.
And how do you know which portions you're supposed to fill out?
The death certificate is a number of boxes, each of which contains a piece of information. 59 in this version of the 59 boxes. Some of them are shaded gray. These are the ones that are the responsibility of the medical examiner's office. Others are the responsibility of the funeral home, including information that is identified as having been obtained from next of kin or other informants. Some of them are, and I can't tell you which ones off the top of my head, but responsibility of the cemetery or crematorium. But the gray ones are our responsibility. There are three kinds of death certificates in the state of Connecticut. One is for the use of the medical examiner's office, one is for the use of other physicians, and one is to be used in stillborn infants who are over 20 weeks gestation but not born alive. The ones for the medical examiners, the doctor's portion is shaded gray. The one for non-medical examiner, live-born individuals, the doctor's portions are shaded pink. And I don't remember what the fetal one is colored. The fetal one is very extensive, and there's a lot of stuff about the parents and mother that get torn off and are never issued. So it's not something we dealt with a lot.
And so those are 3 different forms?
Yes.
And this specific form in Exhibit 4, which of the 3
This
is
is
that?
the one for the medical examiner's office, and that's the code. Every document in the state has a code number.
And what is the code?
In this case, it is VS4ME, and it says 404. That means vital statistics, subset medical examiner. VS4 is death certificate for adults.
Okay.
So, okay? The pink one would be VS4, but not ME.
Okay.
And then the date that is the last time it was revised. And that's a whole other government process that goes on forever.
And you've been handed Exhibit 8, which I'll represent to you has that VS-4ME designation.
Yes.
Do you recognize this document?
Yes, I do.
What is it?
This is a copy of the death certificate I signed for Noah Posner. Just for the record, Exhibit 4 is life-size. Exhibit 8 has been reduced to fit on the paper with other information.
And how do you know that this is Noah Posner's death certificate?
I signed it. I recognize it. Also, I compared my copies of the original records in preparation for coming here today.
And you'd mentioned that each case had a case number assigned to it.
Yes.
Which number was assigned to Noah Posner?
12-17604. It is a unique number indicating that it is the 17,604th death reported to the office in the year 2012.
And is that reflected in box 36?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Can you walk me through the portions that you filled out in Noah Posner's death certificate?
Okay, in the copy in Exhibit 8, the grayness of the boxes are not especially easily visible. Probably having something to do with the fact that these were designed when long before the current copying technology reached its maturity. However,
And if you need a minute to review, feel free.
Yeah. And it basically reflects that the cause of death was multiple gunshot wounds, that I classified the manner of death as homicide, that I recorded that the injury occurred on the 14th of December, 2012. There is box number 46, which says time of injury. This is, in our office, we routinely fill out either AM, PM, or unknown because it's so difficult to get documentation otherwise. Place of injury is listed as school, primary, or secondary. This is all done on a computer, so I didn't have the opportunity to simply say grade school. This is what somebody put in it. And,
So it was like a fillable form?
it's a fillable form, right? In fact, I actually do this on the computer in the autopsy room. And then the clerical technicians, and then I email them or call them and tell them it's done. Then, given my proclivity for misspelling almost everything in English, they proofread it, make corrections as necessary, sometimes asking me by telephone or not. Then they print it, and we have the template to do all of the stuff in Exhibit 4, and it's printed on special archival paper, and in both of these you can see little circles along the left-hand side. That's because this archival paper is filled with holes so it can go into the 100-year-old form of book that the registrars of vital statistics use. And so then this, the funeral director will take that document with him, her, when they pick up the body. They will then fill out other stuff and file it with the Registrar of Vital Statistics, who fills out other stuff, and then it's eventually filed with the State Registrar of Vital Statistics, who fills out the last box, which is the upper right-hand corner that gives the state code number. I also filled out the location, which was the address of the school. There's a box 50 that says describe how injury occurred. I just said shooting. It was my style to keep that simple as possible. And then, it fills in my name, the date, and stuff about me. And
Okay.
then my signature is in box 52.
Okay. So I'm just going to compare exhibits 8 and 4 using the shaded portions
Yes.
in exhibit 4 just to confirm the boxes that you filled out. So did you fill out box 3 in exhibit 8?
Actually, yes, but that is information that is put into the database about the case and is distributed to a number of documents that are produced from that database, including this one.
Okay. But the Office of the Chief Medical
Yeah,
Examiner?
it's our responsibility to put that in there, and it shows up on other documents, but it automatically shows up here.
Okay. Did you fill out box 4?
Yes, in the same fashion.
So for both boxes 3 and 4, it's the auto-fill based on the case number,
Yes.
but the Office of the Chief Medical
Yes.
Examiner is
In fact, it
responsible.
probably is reflected in a couple of places in Exhibit 7.
Okay, then it looks like the next shaded box is 23. Did you fill that box out?
Well, 23 is only filled out if the death occurred in a hospital, and this didn't, so 23 was left blank.
And box 24, did you fill that out?
Yes,
Box 25,
yes. That's the address of the school. 24 just indicates it's a school.
did you fill out box 26?
Yes. Well, I mean, it was filled out by Office Chief Medical Examiner staff under my direction.
Okay. Did you fill out box 27?
Yes. Similarly,
Did you fill out box 36? I think we mentioned already that you had, but I'll ask you to confirm.
26, yes.
Box 37?
Hold on. This. Oh, yes.
Did you fill out box 38?
Again, yes.
Did you fill out box 39?
Yes.
Did you fill out box 40?
Yes, I did.
Did you fill out box 41?
Box 41 is other significant conditions. I don't have to go to the big copy to give you the exact wording. Contributing to death, but not relating to that in box 40. I made a determination that no such entry was necessary.
And then box 42, is the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner's office responsible for filling out that box?
Yeah.
But you didn't fill it out in this
No,
case?
it's that box is if female, were they pregnant at the time of death or within the last year?
And so for box 43, is the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner responsible for filling out that box?
Yes.
But it wasn't filled out in this case?
No, it was filled out. 43 is.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Did tobacco contribute to the death? This is so hard to determine even in clear-cut cases that I had the computer set to default to unknown.
And did you fill out box 44?
Yes, I did.
Did you fill out box 45?
Yes, I did.
Did you fill out box 46?
Yes, I did.
Did you fill out box 47?
Yes, I did.
Did you fill out box 48?
No, I did not, because it's, I mean, I should have, but it's, the question in box 48 is, the injury occur at work, yes or no? It's kind of a non sequitur in a 6-year-old.
Did you fill out box 49?
Yes, I did.
Box 50?
Yes. Yes.
Did you fill out box 51?
It was not applicable. I did not fill it out. Box 51 is if it's a transportation-related injury, is it a driver, a pedestrian, a passenger, or other? It is not applicable in this case, so I did not address that issue.
Did you fill out box 52?
Yes.
Did you fill out box 53?
Yes.
And then that's your signature?
Actually, box 53 is an autofill.
Okay.
If my name is in 52, the address of the medical examiner's office shows up in 53.
Okay. So in Exhibit 8, does the information in boxes 3, 4, 23 through 27, and 36 through 53 accurately reflect the information that you entered in December of 2012?
Yes, it does.
Has anything changed in the boxes that you filled out? Or
No, it has not.
Okay. And is the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner the first entity to add information to a death certificate?
Yes.
Okay. And if you don't mind, I'm going to ask you to highlight the portions that or the boxes that you filled out
Oh, boy.
in Exhibit 8.
For clarification, you want me to highlight the boxes that were my responsibility I didn't fill out, or just the ones I did? Like the one about whether it's a hospital, whether it's inpatient, emergency room. Didn't fill it out because it's not applicable.
I would fill out, or please fill out the boxes that the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner is responsible for filling out, and I think whether or not you completed them will be self-evident.
Thank you. I gotta find them again.
All set?
All set,
Okay.
I hope.
Well, I'm now handing you what has previously been marked as Exhibit 6. You can go ahead and keep that for now.
Oh, well.
which I'll represent to you as a duplicate copy of Exhibit 8, Noah Posner's death certificate, and which has been highlighted in green by Samuel Green from Abraham L. Green and Son Funeral Home. So if you could please, I know it's repetitive, but please go ahead and highlight the portions that the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner is responsible for filling out in Exhibit 6. Okay. In Exhibit 6, are there any portions of the death certificate that remain unhighlighted?
Yes.
Which portions are those?
There is actually the child's name, which is filled out by us when we have documentation in hand. And in a homicide, some form of documentation is in hand before the body leaves the office. But it's technically that is supposed to represent other records in our office that attach the case number to an identification. The other things that are not filled out here are the part that says this, for the part in which the registrar of vital statistics in the town where the death occurred records that the registrar received and registered or filed the certificate. That is box that doesn't have a number.
And when you say...
It's down on the bottom, and there's a, but I'm sorry, I didn't repeat.
I was just going to clarify, and when you say not filled out, do you mean the unhighlighted portions of Exhibit 6?
Yes, unhighlighted, yes. And then at the upper right, there is a box labeled state file number, which is not highlighted, and that a copy of, I'm not sure of the process, but the death certificates are permanently filed at the Registrar of Vital Statistics in the individual town. There are 169 such offices for the 169 towns in Connecticut. It is also filed with the State Registrar of Vital Statistics, usually at, well, always at a later date because they are forwarded from the town registrar to the state registrar. And then the state registrar has a separate file number. And that is reflected in an unnumbered box in the upper right-hand corner. And that is not highlighted in Exhibit 6 either.
In Exhibits 6 and 8, which I've represented are duplicate copies, Do you believe that the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner completed all of its responsibilities with regard to filling out a death certificate for Noah Posner?
Yes, I do.
And I think you mentioned earlier that the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner is the first entity to add information to a death certificate?
Yes.
So there's an incomplete copy once the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner is finished filling out its portions?
Yes, we are required by statute to keep a copy of the part we fill out. The original document goes with the funeral director. It's never easy in state government. The funeral director must be a licensed funeral director to transport the body. He then files the death certificate, he or she files the death certificate with the registrar of vital statistics in the appropriate town and obtains a transit and burial permit, which allows the funeral director or a funeral director's employee to transport the body and allows the cemetery to inter it. If there is to be a cremation, there's a whole other series of documents.
And did you ever provide Leonard Posner with a copy of Noah Posner's death certificate
No.
that only had your portion filled out?
Oh, I don't know.
Do you have any reason to think he would have a copy?
If Mr. Posner or counsel representing him requested copy of the records, they would routinely be sent the documents that comprise Plaintiff Exhibit 7. If, during discussions with the office personnel or me, they became aware that other documents not routinely sent out were available, and they requested them, we would forward them. Okay. There are a couple of exceptions. We are not allowed, if we have police records in our files, we are not allowed to forward those. They must come from the police department. Similarly, if the police department had copies of Exhibit 7, they would not be allowed to transport it, to send it to the family of the lawyers, the insurance company. They would have to get them from us. So that's, yeah.
Do you have any reason to believe that you provided Leonard Posner with a copy of Noah Posner's death certificate with only the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner's portions filled out shortly after Noah Posner's death?
We may have. I would not have any personal recollection, and it would not be in records that were made available to me at this time. If it existed, I just don't have the records.
But the original copy of Noah Posner's death certificate went to the funeral home, is that right?
The original document on the archival paper went to the funeral home and then obviously made it to the Registrar of Vital Statistics and to the state. Well, what routinely happens is the physical piece of paper stays at the town registrar. A copy goes to the state registrar.
Do you have any reason to doubt that Noah Posner died at Sandy Hook Elementary School, located at 12 Dickinson Drive in Sandy Hook, a community within Newtown, Connecticut, on December 14th, 2012?
Absolutely not.
I think now is a good time for a short break. Mr. Fetzer, I am going to put you on mute for now.
Off the record at 12:27 p.m. On the record at 12:40 p.m.
Okay, so now we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about tissue storage technology. What is an FTA card?
FTA card is about a 3.5 or 4 by 4 inch piece of paper that has been treated in such a fashion that if you put liquid blood on it and let it dry, then it can be stored at room temperature and be usable for DNA analysis later. So it doesn't have to be frozen, doesn't have to be, just have to be dry. And then FTA cards come with an envelope for storing them. I think it's impregnated with foil. I haven't looked at one in a long time, but they're designed for long-term storage of blood samples to be useful for DNA analysis. The name FTA refers to Flinders Technology Associates. The technology for doing this was developed by scientists at Flinders University in New South Wales, Australia. They patented it, they market it all over the world, and the last time anybody told me anything about this, they financed a great deal of the university on the sale of this stuff.
And so how do you know about FTA cards?
When I was chief, I talked to my technical people that I wanted to do long-term storage of DNA. One of the things you're responsible for when you're in charge of a laboratory of any type is called retention policy. So how long do you keep each kind of specimen before you dispose of it? This is extremely important because, well, for a variety of reasons in different circumstances. In our circumstances, there is always the possibility that somebody wants to review or redo the examinations. And they can redo a toxicology examination, they can redo examination under the microscope or ask that an examination under the microscope be done. There are various storage methods for various things. The blood and other samples for toxicology are frozen after they're analyzed, but that only keeps them good for so long. Tissues that are preserved in formaldehyde can be saved for longer periods of time and dried. So I was, interested in, I was developing these protocols. And it occurred to me that this DNA thing was becoming more and more important, and that we should have DNA available for as long as possible. So one of my former mentors, when I asked him, how long should you keep tissue specimens, he said, as long as you have storage space to do it. Because you never know when the question is going to come up. So I believe it was my chief toxicologist who said, I got just the thing for you. And they say it's good for 10 years, but that's because it was only invented 10 years ago.
And so they're useful,
And
the FTA cards are useful because they have a long shelf life.
Huge shelf life, and they don't take up much space. Okay. And as I said, DNA it's not always applicable, but when it's applicable, it's valuable.
And so you used these FTA cards in the office of the chief medical examiner?
Anybody who has a liquid blood sample that's examined, for whatever reason, we created FTA card. And it's stored permanently. So even if somebody were to come in for a cremation examination, had a death certificate from a private doctor, we have to sign off on all cremations. by law. If the body gets into the office, we grab a needle and syringe and get a blood sample and keep it. Because you never know what you're going to be required to. Somebody's going to ask a question, and you're much better off having to answer it. Now, similarly, if we look at stuff under the microscope, that comes out on a 3 by 1 inch piece of glass, which can be stored indefinitely. Okay? I mean, researchers are still looking at glass slides that were prepared in the 1840s. Okay? And so, under my administration, we kept them indefinitely. And I think they still do. I just don't have a lot of contact with the policy and the things there anymore.
And so you mentioned a needle and syringe. Can you walk me through the process of collecting samples for these FTA cards?
Okay. Well, if you do an internal examination, during most of my tenure, you simply opened the veins that led to the heart and collected the blood from there. There's a great deal of research that indicates a sample taken from a vein far away from the heart may be a better reflection of what's going on during life than a sample taken at autopsy from the heart. And so we started collecting a sample after we opened the body from the femoral vein, which is down near the groin. Actually, it's not called a femoral vein until it gets out of the abdomen, but it's far away from the heart as you can get during an autopsy, conveniently, and keeping that separately. But it's a needle and syringe. It is the same equipment that's used to give you an injection, to put medicine in your IV fluid, or to draw a blood sample in live people. Now, most people will be familiar with a device that draws the blood out of your vein with a vacuum in a tube. You can get more specimen easier at autopsy with a regular syringe, where instead of pushing on the plunger, you pull it. Okay? And it's cheaper. Always an issue in government work. So that's how that's done, and then it would be put in a suitable container and labeled, and then it's put in a refrigerator in the autopsy room. The autopsy room is either manned or locked 24 hours a day. The technician from the toxicology lab, which is on the 3rd floor, autopsy room is on the 1st, would have a key, come in, get the material, the associated paperwork, take it back to the toxicology lab, log it in, put it into the storage facilities, and the toxicology lab is always locked. And it would be in that environment that the technician would take a sample of blood and drop it on the card. Now, the card, as I said, is about 4 inches in diameter, or 4 inches square, maybe a little smaller, and has printed 4 circles. And you drop blood on it in the circle until it fills up the circle, kind of like a biologic SAT exam. And then those are left to dry in a protected environment, a fume hood. And once they are dried, then they are packaged. Permanent labels are affixed, and then they go into storage, and we wait for somebody to ask.
So it was the State of Connecticut Office of the Chief Medical Examiner's practice to obtain these samples from everybody?
Everybody who came in dead that we could get them. Obviously, there are people who have been dead a long time, whose DNA samples are only appropriately taken from teeth or bones. Those teeth or bone samples would go directly to the state police crime, what colloquially called the crime lab. Because the way things are divided up, there's the ones who did the DNA analysis if we needed them for crime scene evidence or identification of a otherwise destroyed body. And the other thing these are used for is not only the vast majority of the samples that get used are used for paternity, because a child whose parents were not married, if the father died and was in the Social Security system, the child can get benefits to age 21. But you got to prove that it's the biologic father. And the mother saying so doesn't meet the criteria of the Social Security Administration, but a DNA test does. So the vast majority of these FTA cards, a quarter of it goes to a private, we don't do those tests, but the family of the child in question would pay for it privately, and we would ship the section of FTA card to the laboratory of her choice directly, so that wasn't, it's a chain of evidence thing. Keep it documented.
And so you mentioned how these samples and how the FTA cards are stored. Could anyone access the samples without authorization?
No. All the rooms in the toxicology laboratory at that time are locked, even now, are locked 24 hours a day. And you have to have a key to get in. And eventually we went to the electronic keys, so we had a record of who went in. And interestingly enough, had a record of who tried to get in but wasn't authorized to do so. Pretty sophisticated system.
Could anyone access the FTA cards without authorization?
Only toxicology staff, me, and you know, I don't know if the other doctors' cards opened the tox lab or not. I mean, certainly I wouldn't object to it if they did, but
there were a limited number of
there were a
people
limited
who could
number
access.
of people, yeah. In other words, the clerical staff had access to the lock on my office because they had to dump and pick up paperwork there constantly. But they didn't have access to the tox lab, okay? And some of them didn't have access to medical records, where other people did because they had to get at them, but you know.
And did you create an FTA card for Noah Posner?
Yes, I did. Well, I sent a sample and label for it to be created under my direction.
Can you tell me a little bit more about the sample you collected from Noah Posner?
It was blood. As I said, we did not do the procedures where we went inside the body. So I took a needle and syringe and inserted it into both of his chest cavities. That is, anything that's under your ribs, although internally the diaphragm, which separates the belly cavity from the chest cavity, is dome-shaped. It goes upwards, which is why when you contract it, it gets flat and pulls down on the lung to suck in air. So somewhat high up in the chest cavity, you put a needle through the space between the ribs, even in somebody built like me, it's an inch. And then you pull on the syringe, and that, one, gets me the sample, and two, told me that Noah had bled into both chest cavities from his injuries.
And then so you took steps to send the blood sample to toxicology to create the FDA card?
Yes, we put it in a container. It's either a 3-ounce jar or a 7-ounce tube, depending on how much you can get. The doctor puts the label on her or himself. Fewer hands in the pudding, the less chance of a mistake. And then I think I went over that was to be placed in a refrigerator in the autopsy room, which is either manned or locked. When the technician's work shift ends, the doors lock automatically. And then a technician from the tox lab would retrieve it from there, and as I said before.
And is it the same blood sample that's reflected in the toxicology report in Exhibit 7 on page 5?
Yes. Even if a toxicology examination for drugs, alcohol, or poisonous chemicals is not performed, a report is generated to document that the laboratory got and has the specimens. And that's the type of report that's generated in this case.
And did you say that the FDA cards themselves are also stored in refrigeration, or
No,
have I gotten
that's the
that
beauty
mistaken?
of them. They're room temperature.
So how are they stored?
Ever increasingly large file cabinets. They're, as I said, they're not particularly big, so they're amenable to a file cabinet that was designed for index cards, which you can stack as high as you got ceiling.
And so you created these protocols in the office of the
Yes.
chief medical examiner?
Yes. As I said, part of the administrative head of any system that takes samples in, analyzes them, and eventually has to get rid of them is responsible for creating a retention schedule. And then actually, if I may look at, the retention schedule is actually printed on the bottom of the toxicology report for those specimens.
Can you point that to?
This is the page, the last document in Exhibit Plaintiff 7. At the bottom, under the bold-faced line, it says, unless OCME, Office of the Chief Medical Examiner, is notified in writing, specimens and/or evidence retained in this case will be destroyed 1 year after the date of this report. We may have modified that to reflect the fact that DNA cards are kept forever, but and we would occasionally send this to the law journal, the complete schedule of all the stuff we keep, paper records, check receipts, all that stuff, okay? We would send a schedule of all that to the law journal to publish at their discretion, mainly because lawyers are the biggest users of that kind of information, and not to be pejorative about it, but forensic pathology means the pathology that's of interest to the law, so the law journal's a good way to talk to you guys.
Do you know if the samples taken from Noah Posner were retained?
They were retained. I don't know if they were retained indefinitely, and with observant Jewish families, sometimes the families request them to be buried at the end of the year. I just don't have access to any records on that.
Okay, so there's one more clarification question. Will you look at Exhibit 8? In box 39.
Let me find 8.
Sure.
Okay. 39. Yes,
That asks, was an autopsy performed? And the box is checked no.
that's correct.
Why is that?
That question refers to whether the body was opened, the skin was incised, and organs examined in place and or removed. This was not done in Noah's case. There are rare, period, okay? There's no need to get into details of gunshot wounds to the head and suicides.
Okay, well, that concludes my direct examination. Mr. Fetzer?
Thank you, Marissa. Dr. Carver, I'm grateful for your appearance here and the opportunity to address a few questions to you. You've been very thorough and comprehensive in relation to the death certificate. And I hope that my questions aren't redundant of some you may have already answered, but I'm quite new to all this, so I hope you can forgive me.
Well,
And
of
as I
course,
understand
of course, sir, but just to improve your lawyering skills, the only time redundant questions are a no-no is in front of a jury where somebody's going to go to jail. So
Okay,
please,
good. Thanks.
please feel free. I'll try to accommodate you.
Thanks very, very much. Now, the medical examiner's report to which Marissa referred as page 1, is that not actually page 2? Was there not a cover page?
The document I think you're referring to is Exhibit 7. Exhibit 7 is 3 separate documents. So the first one is the report of investigation. The report of the post-mortem examination is labeled 1 of 3, 2 of 3, and 3 of 3. But for the purposes of Exhibit 7, starts on page 2. Do you have a copy?
Okay.
Do you have a copy of these with you?
Well, Marissa sent me, let's see, about 6 pages. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pages, and then the blank death certificate. The other, the state certified death certificate.
Yes.
But that's fine, Dr. Carver. But when you talk about the circumstances of death, the first notification you received was at 11:15 hours from Sergeant James Thomas of the Connecticut Central District Major Crimes Unit.
I may have received notification earlier, but we didn't get around to creating case records and assigning case numbers or reserving case numbers until 11 o'clock. That's an official time that they started creating documents.
And the official time of your arrival at the scene was 4:05.
No, it's Investigator Rinaldi's official arrival at the scene. I was there much earlier.
Oh, very good. Okay. Let me show you Exhibit B, my first exhibit, and ask you if you can identify what we see in that exhibit.
Okay, it's going to be some organization here until I have something to look at.
Mr. Fetzer, did you provide copies of those to the court reporter, or have you emailed copies
Yes.
to me?
Yes, the court reporters have them in her
Do you mind if we go off the record really quickly so you can email those to me so I can be looking at them at the same time?
Well, I wanted to provide them to you one at a time. I may not use all of these, particularly given what you've already covered for us. So I wanted to make them available as I submit my request to Dr. Carver.
That's fine.
Do we have Exhibit B?
1 second.
One moment.
Oh, is that?
Actually, if you don't mind, can we take a quick break and go off the record?
Off the record at 1:07 p.m. On the record at 1:08 p.m.
Do you have Exhibit B, Dr. Carver?
Yes, I do.
Could you describe what it shows?
It is an aerial view of a building, a parking lot with multiple cars. And
And is there a particularly distinctive feature there? Yes. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut off.
I'm not quite sure what you're referring to.
But isn't that the portable tent there in the
Oh,
parking
yes,
lot?
yes, I believe so. You have to realize I never saw the thing in the daylight. I don't know what color it was. But yes, that would be the approximate location of where we set up the temporary building.
Was this your first visit to the Sandy Hook Elementary School?
Yes.
Objection
How were
form.
you
I'm
summoned
sorry.
to the school?
I didn't hear the question, I'm sorry. Please repeat.
How were you summoned to the school? What got you to the school? You mentioned, in relation to the report, how 11:15 when Sergeant Thomas made the contact, you were there well before 4:05.
Objection
Was it
form.
in response to?
I'm sorry, I'm not hearing that. Can you just speak up a little bit?
Sure. How were you summoned, and at what time to the school?
We were informed of the situation by telephone. I have no recollection of what time. I probably drove myself, which would be my custom, but I also have no direct written record.
So your office does not have phone logs, for example, for this event?
Those were created later and reflected in at 11. The beginning of those creations were at 11 o'clock that day, and that was after my assessment, scene assessment of what we're going to need to create. I wanted.
And the tent is. Go ahead.
I did not want. I knew we were going to have multiple case numbers. I wanted them to be successive, in order without gaps, which I knew from experience would be of great assistance in organizing things later. So we did not start creating logs in the computer until I knew how many we needed.
So at what time did you arrive at the scene?
I have a vague recollection that it was about 9:30, but I could be wrong. But somewhere early.
9:35 a.m.
Yes.
How long were you there on the 14th?
I don't have a direct recollection, but I'm pretty sure I was there until 10:30 at night.
Now, the purpose of the tent was to provide a facility for the conduct of autopsies, correct?
It was, well, not quite. It was to perform initial cleaning, evaluation, and identification and documentation of the nature of photographic identification. The formal.
If I refer to the,
Go ahead, please.
if I refer to the facility as the tent, who ordered the tent?
I'm not sure, but it involved both the health department and the Army. And it may have been the Connecticut National Guard, but somehow in the discussions of things, either I came up with the idea or somebody else said, do you think you could use? And I would have enthusiastically agreed, and the next thing I knew, it was going up. Because among other things, there were media helicopters overhead. And we felt that as much discretion of handling of the bodies at the scene as possible would be appropriate.
Were you present when it was set up?
I was somewhere there. I may have been in the building doing other stuff, but yes. I do distinctly.
About how long did it? Go ahead.
I do distinctly remember that I was questioned or asked to advise on whether we should use a portable wooden floor or we should use the surface of the parking lot as the floor. And my opinion was whatever's easiest to clean.
What equipment was inside the tent?
Almost nothing. We used our, we have portable devices for, carts for transporting bodies. They are designed so that you can have a body on it and back it up or move it to the back of a transportation vehicle, get the end of the device in the vehicle, operate some levers, and then the legs collapse and you can roll it into the vehicle. And then when you get where you're going, you do those operations in reverse, you have it out of the vehicle at waist height and on wheels. So we utilize those for the examinations, probably use some sort of portable backgrounds like plastic sheets for backgrounds for the photography. I don't remember, but we always have had pretty strict criteria for photographs to not have extraneous stuff in the background of a picture.
So, was this tent a FEMA facility?
May have been, I just don't know. As I said, I was just grateful it was there. I didn't, and quite frankly, as a public administrator, grateful I didn't have to pay for it. But I was very grateful it was there. I wasn't going to ask any other questions about where it came from.
Who else was there in the tent with you?
My chief photographer, a number of my technicians, And I think that's it. There may have been police personnel assisting us with paperwork or ferrying information in and out to us. I only say that because that would have been normal. Well, as if anything in this situation is normal. But if the police personnel were undoubtedly involved, it would be the police department's responsibility for reporting who.
So what activities were taking place inside the tent? Forgive me if you already addressed part of that.
We would assess each body and compare the clothing and sex and race and physical characteristics to records that had been gathered by the police, assign a case number to that body. As I said, a number of, 28 case numbers had been reserved for this incident, but then we would assign one of them to that body, then take photographs with that case number adjacent to the face. Sometimes the picture was en face, sometimes in profile, depending on the nature of the injuries, which can be quite deforming in this case.
Sir, you had
Go ahead, please.
you had photographs. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, we took the photographs suitable for identification. Those were then transferred to state police equivalent equipment. If you look at the tent in Exhibit B, there is a white rectangle above as you look at the picture. That's the state police van. Or actually the white rectangle is a awning that hangs out the side of the state police van. And they had the printing facilities to print those pictures and get them on the way to the families.
So you had photographs of each of the decedents, both from the tent, I take it, but also inside the school itself?
And I believe we have pictures inside the school itself. The majority of the pictures inside the school itself were taken by the police. But I think we took enough to say this body is associated with this case number.
Well, we have never had access. Could you produce those photographs that were taken under suitable conditions of confidentiality?
That would be the responsibility of the current chief medical examiner, and I can't answer that question.
What are the hoses coming out the back of the tent?
The what? I'm sorry, I didn't understand your question.
Hoses.
Oh, it's the ventilation. It's the ventilation system. That's the thing. There's a truck next to it that's not it's in the shadow, so you can't see it. That pumps in air. It's you know those big things they put over tennis courts. It's kind of like that. The pressure inside is partially responsible for it standing up.
So there was you needed water inside the tent. What was the source of water?
I don't recall, but probably a hose. We don't have facilities for bringing our own water.
Trying to exhibit C, if it might be provided to you.
I'm going to have to wait until it's provided.
Yes.
Yes, sir. I now have the,
you recognize the scene?
yes, I do.
When was that photograph taken?
I don't know, but I know the press conference either started, my portion of it either started or at least encompassed 5 p.m. on that day.
Do you recall saying our goal was to get the kids out and to the funeral directors first?
Yes.
What did you mean by the word out?
To have the examinations completed and the paperwork, specifically the paperwork, primarily the death certificate, but there are also receipts, so that the bodies could be in the possession of the funeral directors, which technically means they're in the possession of the families because the funeral directors are functioning for them. And my experience is that delays in this process can produce additional emotional distress to people who are already pretty compromised in that respect.
Who declared the victims to be dead?
In Connecticut, that can be done by a competent emergency medical technician. And that was what was done.
Do you have the name of that person or persons?
I'm referring to a document to refresh my recollection, and I do not have it with me. It was obvious from the scene that a great deal of...
Who brought the... Go ahead.
It was obvious from the scene there was more than one.
Who brought the bodies out?
My people.
And they were brought into the tent?
Yes.
And then they were transported to your office?
Yes. In our vehicles.
And, yes, when did that take place?
I'm not sure when it started. I know that the last of them left the scene at approximately 10:30 p.m.
And the bodies were identified again exactly how? Meaning the identity.
At a bare minimum, a photograph that we prepared with the case number was taken by police to relatives or other people who were had appropriate knowledge of the children and the adults. That was confirmed to the police and included in their records. In Noah Posner's case, the family, specifically his mother, elected to view the body at the funeral home and sign a second document saying that she'd viewed the body and that was who it was. An in-person identification by a parent and a signature attesting to that supersedes a police officer showing a photograph to a parent and filing a report on it. And so that's the identification that was in the official documents I reviewed before coming here today. I would not have easy access to any of the police documents, and I would be prohibited by law from dispersing them to other people. I could write in a report that I reviewed them, but it was not necessary in this case.
Did you see any ambulance persons to hospitals?
No, only two, my understanding that only two people were taken to hospital. That was done before my arrival. I know two dead children were taken to hospital. I have a vague recollection that somebody with minor non-lethal wounds was taken to hospital, but I have no, that's just a 5-year-old memory. And I would have no authority over that person, so. Sorry.
Did you see any medevac choppers landing and picking up a wounded person?
No, I did not.
Triage tarps were laid out, but no bodies were placed on them. What was the point if you...
Objection,
No.
foundation, and form.
I have no knowledge of that period.
Okay.
If a triage is used, my understanding is triage is used when there are, you have to prioritize distribution of medical services. And my understanding, it would be appropriate to start that process. It would also be appropriate to stop it once you determined everybody was dead.
During the press conference, you were asked about this being having to deal with horrible things at times, and you mentioned that you deal with difficult things all the time, but this is over the top. You've been at this for a third of a century. You recall saying that in particular.
I have blanked out as much of that press conference as possible, but it sure sounds like me. It sounds like something, yeah.
Let me read a bit more. This is probably the worst I have seen, or the worst that I know of any of my colleagues having seen. And
Yeah.
that all the more makes me proud and grateful to our staff, who to a man have just behaved most professionally and strongly. And I hope the people of Newtown don't have it crash on their head later. What did you mean by that last sentence? What did it refer to?
In the midst of a crisis, particularly a trained individual will simply put their emotional responses aside and do their job. And non-trained individuals will put their emotional responses aside, either on purpose or inadvertently, just to get through it. And those people it is not, I won't say commonly, it is not uncommon for those people to react to the depth of the tragedy, the seriousness of the event later. Some of my personnel had troubles with that. Some of them simply said, it's my job, and if they had trouble with it, they didn't tell me. And I knew from experience that the families, some of them would experience the depth of the tragedy immediately, and from others would act stoically and deal with it and have pain from it later. So at that point in the press conference, I was probably getting worn out and less eloquent than I could be. But that's what I meant. And I know from experience that it can take, people can either experience the full horror of this sort of thing immediately, or it can come and they realize the personal reaction to it at a later date. And crashing down on you is a common colloquialism for this phenomena, and in my assessment of working with people like this, probably a very appropriate colloquialism.
Did any of you have to use the restrooms while you were at Sandy Hook Elementary School?
If I was there for that many hours and didn't have to do it multiple times, so yes, I can't account for my other personnel.
Did you use a restroom within the school?
I can't recall there being a portable facility available, but I just don't remember. I just know my medical status, and I had to use, it's impossible for me not to have used the restroom over that course of time. I have no idea what I actually did. It wasn't, I'm sorry, sir, but it's not the sort of detail that you file away.
There was a porta potty in the parking lot, and I just wondered whether you knew of it or had used it.
Objection, Foundation.
I have no direct memory of that at all. I can only tell you from experience and my medical conditions at the time that I must have peed someplace.
Dr. Carver, the law was changed about a year before Sandy Hook to allow keeping the names of murdered minors secret. Did you support that law?
First of all, that law was after Sandy Hook. I did not support it because I felt that the Office of Chief Medical Examiner has a strong responsibility to tell the public what's happened. We also have strong responsibilities to keep certain private details private. Basically, I drew the line at saying anything that was on a death certificate, which is public information in the state of Connecticut, and in our possession, we would release. I felt that and children are vulnerable because they're children, and then there's a group of children who are compromised with various disabilities, which makes them even more vulnerable. And society in general has an obligation to protect them, and the state in specific has very strong responsibilities to protect them. And if the individuals whose are killed or injured are kept from the public cannot hold responsible individuals responsible. And so I felt that while it would be inappropriate for me to describe a child's individual wounds in any situation other than a courtroom or a deposition, okay, where technically a judge is, or someone with the judge's authority is telling me to release this information, that would be unnecessary burden on the privacy of the survivors. But the fact that the child was murdered and how is information society needs to conduct itself properly. Obviously, these are personal opinions, but I think they're pretty good.
Could you take a look at Exhibit B, which is very much like Exhibit B, absent tent?
It's going to have to be produced here. Give us a second.
Right.
D1, D2, D3, which all seem to, they're not photographs though. Is there just an exhibit D as well?
You thoroughly discussed those. I'm talking about exhibit E.
Oh, E. E as in Edward.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
E.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Okay, I have Exhibit E in my hand as we speak.
You have exhibit E in your hand, yes.
Yes.
It's also true in exhibit B, and I just wondered if you noticed how the cars in the middle two rows are all parked facing the school.
Objection, foundation, inform.
Well, Dr. Carver was there in the parking lot. I'm just asking whether he observed that the vehicles there in the middle two rows are parked facing the school.
It is obvious in the picture, but I did not take cognizance of it at the time.
Did you notice at the time that there was no handicap parking at the school?
At the time, I had not received my handicap parking permit from the state as of yet. So and I'm usually cognizant of handicap parking both as a user and an administrator, but I wasn't one and I wasn't thinking like an administrator at the time.
Sure. Now, you mentioned you were in and out of the school. If you look at exhibit G,
G as in George?
yeah.
Yes. I have Exhibit G in my hand.
And what are you looking at?
It's a picture of the front of it's Exhibit G. It's a picture of the front door of the school.
Yeah.
And it is sub-labeled outside view of shattered glass window.
Did you observe that personally at the time?
Yes, I did.
Take a look at it, exhibit H for Harry. Or Henry.
Or Harold. I have Exhibit H in my hand.
Did you notice the furniture when you went into the school?
I'm sorry. I purely a matter
Can you
of
see
the
the
quality.
furniture?
Purely a matter of the quality of a small speaker. Could you repeat the question?
Yes. Did you notice the furniture there?
I vaguely remember it, yes.
And does it look as you remember it?
My memory is very vague. I can give you only a partial answer, is that my vague memory includes no discrepancies.
Exhibit I, Idaho.
I have Exhibit I in my hand.
Now, in relation to exhibit H, there is identified a magazine rack.
Yes?
I is the back of the magazine rack. Do you notice a defect there?
Yes?
What caliber slug would you
Conviction Foundation.
Would that be consistent with the use of a small caliber round?
It's consistent with the high energy round. Caliber is merely one measure of a round, and small caliber rounds are commercially and militarily available in very low energy and extremely high energy. So this picture would not give me any information as to caliber, which is the diameter of a bullet, but does tell me that if it is confirmed that these are firearms defects, which they appear to be, then it was a firearm capable of delivering a great deal of energy.
Please consider Exhibit F. F for Frank.
Oh, and one addendum to my questions about Exhibit I.
Yes.
As a forensic pathologist, and given the places I've worked and trained, I know a lot about firearms that most physicians don't. I also know enough to know that really technical questions I'd have to study another 5 years to be able to answer as an expert witness in a court. And I'm not studying dead people, studying firearms. Okay, I have Exhibit F.
Did you notice that Sandy Hook Elementary School had entrances and exits that were not wheelchair accessible?
This was not high on my mind at the time. I have no recollection of that.
Let's turn to Exhibit J.
Yes.
In the upper right-hand corner, for file number 1QC.
Oh, it's blank.
And would a copy like this be public without a file number?
If it was obtained from the Registrar of Vital Statistics in Newtown, it would not have a file number. That is a state file number and is only on the copy retained by the state Registrar of Vital Statistics, who maintains copies from all 169 different town registrars. So this Exhibit J has been signed by the town registrar, so it has made that exhibit. But unlike Plaintiff 6, which was obtained from the State Registrar of Vital Statistics and is so labeled, it does not. Exhibit J does not have the file number there, nor would it normally be expected to.
But
Oh, death certificates are public records. Any private party can get a copy from any of the 169 town registrars of vital statistics or from the state registrar of vital statistics. If you go to the State of Connecticut Department of Public Health website, they make this very clear. They also make it clear that there's about an 8-week turnaround time for obtaining it from the state, and in most instances, it's faster to get it from the town. Now, there are also towns that are overburdened and have trauma center hospitals in them who have death certificates. They have a lot of them. So those towns may be slower as opposed to towns which are primarily residential and don't have the volume. But where you get it is up to you.
In box 4, actual or presumed time of death, it states 11 a.m. Is that correct?
That is the time we have records of competent medical authority, in this case EMTs, making that determination. It is I believe we use the same time for every death in the school, simply as a matter of when somebody told us it had been completed.
Even though,
I'm sorry.
even though have you read the official report by Danbury State's Attorney Stephen Sadinsky,
No, I have not.
who put the time of the shooting from 9:30 to 9:40 a.m.?
Oh, the time in box 3 is an administrative function. It is not in any way intended to be an investigative function or a definitive statement of when this actually occurred. This is not an uncommon problem, and one of the things a forensic pathologist is expected to address is how soon after the person was injured did they die, and that can range from minutes before competent medical authority got to them to decades. So if Mr. Sadinsky's report says that the shootings occurred during that time limit or that time frame, I have no reason to believe that the information he was provided is not correct. And in case of Noah Posner, he had 3 gunshot wounds and stigmata of a 4th. And the nature of the wounds and their physical distribution on the body made it impossible for me to tell which one came first, second, third, and fourth. But if someone were to ask me how long did he survive after being shot within that time frame, it's an extremely short period of time.
And in box 38 again, it says time pronounced at 11 a.m.
Yes.
But that's not correct. I mean, didn't you suggest that they were pronounced dead by EMTs earlier in the morning?
That is what the EMTs provided us as their, that's what I was provided as the time, and given that my responsibilities for fine-tuning that biologically are as I have just described, I had no reason to not use it.
Exhibit K, please. Cave.
Yes, I have Exhibit K.
Which is, of course, the same as the one Marissa previously presented. You were talking about the Form VS4ME 404. That's from the state, or that's from your office, is that correct? That's
No,
what
that's
form used by.
No, that's from the state librarian who assigns that number.
Oh, no, I meant the number of the form, the number of the form.
Yes, the number of the form, VS-4ME revised 2004. That number is actually assigned by the state librarian.
You notice across the top it says boxes 12 and 22 corrected as her father, 61413 Leonard Pozner.
Yes.
Is that unusual? I mean,
No, it's not.
This was a change of.
No, and what those are,
Yeah.
that would not be unusual at all. Death certificates are so frequently amended by the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner that we actually have a separate form to submit those changes. But anybody else who's responsible for other areas can request that they be changed. And the procedure is to strike out the old material, but to strike it out in such a fashion that it's still legible, and enter the new material on the original death certificate, annotate it to such that it reflects that it has been done. And although I have never physically seen this, it is my understanding that the individual town registrar of vital statistics attaches a copy of the document requesting the change to the original. I have no idea what their criteria for releasing that original document are.
Notice box 12, residence. I mean, isn't it odd? I mean, surely the decedent didn't change his residence after his death.
Ms. Fetzer, I have no idea why this was done. All I know is that the Registrar of Vital Statistics in the town of Newtown felt that the reasons presented to her were appropriate, and she acted accordingly. That's absolutely all I know.
Let's look at Exhibit L. L for Lee or Leo or.
Okay, I have Exhibit L in my hand.
Comparing with Exhibit K, where the file number is handwritten, here we have only a partial file number, which appears to be either 0, 2, should not have two file numbers, should it?
Well, first of all, this was, I have no idea what it is.
Okay, you find this puzzling too.
I have no idea. I don't find it puzzling because people write all sorts of stuff on documents, but I have no experience. I have no knowledge or experience here.
Okay. Please look at Exhibit M.
Yes. I have.
Notice this is a different form. It appears to have been revised in 2009 in relation to the number in the upper left. Am I correct?
Well, I can't read it, but I have no reason to.
Yeah, I agree. It's hard to read.
Hold on, I have an opportunity to correct that. Hold on.
And for the record, can you explain what you're doing?
I am taking a picture with my cell phone, which will allow me to use my fingers to make it bigger. It doesn't help.
It appears as a VS4 revision 1109.
Yes.
Objection Foundation.
Well, we're talking about death certificates.
Yes.
This is one for a friend of mine who died in Connecticut. I wanted it as a contrast case, and I was struck that it's a different form than those for Noah Posner and others.
Yes, this is a death certificate for use in natural disease by a physician who is not associated with the office of the chief medical examiner. The physician who is not appointed an assistant, an associate, a deputy, or chief medical examiner would not be allowed to fill in a death certificate such as filed in Noah Posner's death. The death certificate in Exhibit M is a different form which is reserved for the use by physicians not associated with the medical examiner's office and limited to deaths due to natural disease.
And I'd just like to state for the record that I haven't been provided a copy with the exhibits, so it hasn't been brought to my attention until you mentioned that this was a completely unrelated certificate of your friend. So I'd just like to make a blanket relevancy objection due to the narrow scope of this defamation claim that plaintiff has brought and under the bifurcated counterclaim, as Judge Remington mentioned in the hearing on April 18th, 2019.
Dr. Carver, could you explain the number, then the file number? I take it the 2017 is the year. The other numbers?
I'm sorry, I'm not quite sure what you're...
The file number is 201707027410. I just wondered the meaning of those. There's a similarity with the Noah Pozner 2012.
That is a creation of to the best of my knowledge, that is a creation of the State Registrar of Vital Statistics, and who at the time was Elizabeth Frugali, and you're going to have to ask her how the system is set up, but that's her number. And
Well, there's similarities, yes.
yes, well, I assume that's her number, okay? And the year and some serial number, or some unique identifier after that is a common method of assigning identification numbers in government.
Let's turn to Exhibit N. Exhibit N.
Okay. I have Exhibit N in my hand.
Go ahead.
I have Exhibit N
Are
in.
you in this photograph?
I have no idea.
Well, we can move in closer if you like in Exhibit O and Exhibit P. Would that be you, Dr. Carver?
It's a tall guy with a bald head and a lanyard around his neck for, and other than that, I can't tell you. Huh?
You don't recognize that to be yourself?
The quality of these exhibits did not allow me to say definitively.
I see. You recognize, go back to Exhibit N, you recognize the large vehicle in the middle of the photograph?
Only that it's labeled.
I'm sorry?
Only in that it's labeled. The times I dealt with that vehicle, what I presume that vehicle is, I was always on the other side.
Well, I've had two different identifications. One, it was a SWAT vehicle. The other was a crime scene investigative vehicle.
Oh, no, if that's my choice, it's the crime scene vehicle.
It's a crime scene vehicle.
Yeah, SWAT teams don't have awnings.
This would not be you waiting for the arrival of portable mortuary 10?
Objection, foundation, and form.
Heavens, no. If you look at the, shadows, this is in the morning. The tent didn't arrive until after dark. And your picture of the tent is the next day.
This is very interesting. Did you notice the series of four windows in classroom 10 right above the roof of the vehicle? Do you see those? I'm sorry I'm not present to be more specific, but there's a string of four windows. You can see them in exhibit, the next exhibit, which is Q, exhibit Q.
Well, I see a series of windows. The quality of exhibit.
Do you see them in
The quality of
Exhibit
exhibit,
Q. I'm sorry, go ahead.
the quality of exhibit, depending on the question you ask me, the quality of exhibit Q is abysmal. And I don't know if I'll be able to,
The quality of exhibit Q.
yes.
Don't go back to exhibit, and do you notice crime scene tape is off there?
Yes.
If you look at Q, compare Q with exhibit R. Take a look at Q and R, if you would compare them.
Okay.
Okay, looking at that string of windows above the vehicle, does it look to you more like exhibit Q or more like exhibit R?
The quality of these pictures are poor, and my area of expertise does not extend to examining buildings. Oh, I'm not going to answer that question.
Okay, take a look at exhibit S. This is a higher quality image where you may find it easier to identify the party. Does that make it easier to identify?
No.
Party?
As I said, I do dead people. I don't do things.
Okay. Do you notice the image credit there?
Yes.
To Connecticut State Police.
Yes.
Had you had any contact with the Connecticut State Police related to Sandy Hook prior to your arrival on the scene on the 14th?
I assume there was some sort of telephone contact, whether it was conducted through me or through people reporting to me. I do not know.
You mean on the very same day?
Yes.
I would have meant prior. Yeah, I would have meant prior to that, to the 14th.
About Sandy Hook prior to the 14th? Wait.
Cons-
Are you asking whether I had contact with the state police concerning Sandy Hook prior to the day of the shooting?
Yes.
That's absurd. Of course not.
Take a look at Exhibit T. Exhibit T.
Yes?
Do you notice the furniture shoved up against the windows there?
Yes?
You see where the second pane of those with these paper candles is shot out or damaged?
No?
Well, if you went back to exhibit R, you'd see the same thing there in exhibit R. Maybe it's more obvious. This is just a close-up from a different angle.
Again, sir, in the evaluation of evidence, there are those who do bodies and those who do other things. I may know more than most doctors about this stuff, but I am thoroughly unqualified to express a professional opinion.
Okay, please take a look at the next exhibit, which is U.
Yes, I have it in my hand.
Did you at any time notice this sign, "Everyone must check in"?
No, it's the first time I've seen this picture.
Please look at Exhibit V. Exhibit V.
Okay.
And you noticed porta potties in the vicinity on the day you were there?
No, and this, just as an aside, there is a press, well, there is a vehicle which sports what appears to be a satellite communication device, meaning belonging to the press. So it would have been nowhere near the part of the school I was near.
Thank you. Exhibit W.
Yes?
Were you aware that pizza and bottled water was available at the firehouse?
No?
Exhibit X.
Yes?
Did you notice there were parties there with name tags on lanyards?
Well, including me. No, but no, I did not specifically, I have no specific recollection of anybody other than me wearing a name tag on a lanyard, and the only reason I have a specific recollection of my having it on is that during my time of employment, I wore it constantly and have holes in many of my shirts to prove it.
There were quite a few if you look at Exhibit Y.
Yes?
Another party with name tag on a lanyard, but
Well,
you did not observe.
I did, no, I did not.
Exhibit Z.
Yes?
What do you see?
Well, there is a yellow box highlighting an individual who is sporting both some tag on a lanyard and a pair of sunglasses on his shirt.
And also parents with a child?
Well, no. There are a man and a woman and a child on the man's shoulders.
Yes.
Their relationship is not, there is no obvious explanation of their relationship.
Okay. But would you think any parent would bring a child to the scene of a child shooting massacre?
Objection, Foundation.
I would have no ability to answer that, other than the time my father took me to the burning of Al Gower's fireside in Skokie, Illinois.
I missed that last part, Dr. Carver.
Other than the fact that my father took me to the arson fire of Al Gower's fireside restaurant in Skokie, Illinois when I was 4 years old, I have no personal experience in this kind of thing.
Exhibit double A, please. Exhibit double A.
Okay? I have Exhibit double A in my hand.
Are you aware that included in Appendix A in the book, Nobody Died at Sandy Hook, we have a FEMA manual for a mass casualty exercise involving children to begin at 8 a.m. on the 13th and end at 11:59 on the 13th to be evaluated as a real event on the 14th.
I am totally unaware of that.
Exhibit BD.
Yes?
This is the cover for the report of the state's attorney, Stephen Zadinsky, about Sandy Hook, which I believe you've already testified you have not read.
That's correct.
Exhibit CC.
Okay.
Would it surprise you to learn that the official report fails to establish a causal nexus between the shooter, his victims, and the weapons he is alleged to have used? In particular, there were no fingerprints of Adam Lanza on the rifle he's alleged to have used to shoot his mother.
I'm just
And that none of the over 150 slugs found in the classroom could be matched to the weapon he's alleged to have used.
I didn't hear the beginning of that question. I need you to repeat it, please.
You want me to restate the question?
Yes, I do, please. Thank you.
Yes. Are you aware that the official report by Stephen Zadinsky on the Sandy Hook shooting does not establish a causal nexus between the shooter, his victims, and the weapons he is alleged to have used?
As I stated previously, I have not read the report. A subsection of that is, of course, I'm not aware of that.
So would you find that surprising to be the case for you to read it?
Mr. Fetzer, after almost a half century of dealing with bad people doing bad things, nothing surprises me ever.
Thank you, Dr. Carver. Exhibit DD, as we're very near to the end. Exhibit DD.
Yes.
Are you aware that in the FBI's Consolidated Crime Report for 2012 for Connecticut, when you intersect Newtown with a third column for murder and non-negligent manslaughter, the number recorded is 0?
Well, that's what I see in Exhibit DD.
Yes. Does that surprise you?
But the FBI, of course not. And if we get the ladies out of the room, I'll give you an opinion on the FBI, but. No, you know what, now, without being, if I may back up and stop being facetious, it does not surprise me because I don't know when this was published, and I don't know who accrued the data. I do know that the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner at the time, and actually through my entire tenure, had no ongoing relationship for providing data to the FBI, with the possible exception of individual requests on cases they were investigating. But we did not report routine data dumps to the feds.
Exhibit EE, this is the final exhibit, and then I have just a few more questions to follow. Exhibit EE.
Yes.
If you look at the intersection, this is for crime in Connecticut in 2012 from the FBI report. If you look at the murder, the first column, and under 10 years old, there is the numeral 0.
But this document, unlike the others, provides a qualifier.
I missed the word, Dr. Carver.
Provides a qualifier that this data represents arrest statistics for the year 2012.
Very good, Dr. Carver.
So,
thank you for that.
And when I was,
I have your,
when I met Adam Lanza, he was in no condition to be arrested.
very good, very good. Actually, my questions are not unrelated to Adam Lanza. These are the last few. Did a woman named Jean Henry work for your office at the time of the Sandy Hook event?
Is this the lady we fired for showing Adam Lanza's body to her husband? Is that where you're going?
She showed, I'm only learning about this, Dr. Carver. I'm sure you're in much better position, but what I have been told was she was fired, and I take it for sharing the contents of a bag that was supposed to be Adam Lanza's body.
My recollections, we dismissed her because she brought him into the refrigerator to look at his body.
So she was acting improperly in relation to procedures by doing that.
Yes.
Is there a record of this incident available? Did you make a formal report about it? Was it forthcoming from your office? Could I have a copy of that?
Objection, foundation and form.
My understanding is that disciplinary actions on personnel are not available to the public. But it's not my responsibility to make those decisions anymore. Had you made that request, during my tenure, I would have referred it to the Attorney General's office. Who are...
Dr. Carver, thank you very much. Yes.
I was going to say, the reason the Attorney General's office is, among other things, they function as my lawyer when I'm functioning as the Chief Medical Examiner.
Dr. Carver, thank you very much. You've been very cooperative, and I appreciate that. Thank you. Melissa?
I might just have a couple follow-up questions, but I think it's a good time for a break, if that's okay.
Off the record at 2:28 p.m. On the record at 2:37 p.m.
Okay, Dr. Carver, I actually don't have any more questions for you. I really appreciate you taking the time to testify today. But I wanted to say that this deposition is being marked confidential until the parties have had a chance to designate specific portions of the testimony as confidential under the protective order. And in light of that, Mr. Fetzer, are you aware of anyone that's been listening in to the conference call line at all?
No, that call, I'm sorry, I had put it on Do Not Disturb. No.
Okay, perfect.
The answer is no.
Great. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Off the record at 2:38 p.m.